7 days. Chewing cloves shocked my blood sugar levels. I chewed cloves for 7 days straight to see if this viral internet hack could actually lower my blood sugar. I tracked every minute of it with a continuous glucose monitor, and the final results were not what I expected. But the biggest shock of the entire week, it had absolutely nothing to do with the cloves. What my body did on day 5 sent a clearer message than any spice ever could. So, if you want to see the real data, let's get into it. The basis for the experiment. You've probably seen the claims online. A common kitchen spice, cloves, holds the secret to balancing blood sugar. These tiny dried flower buds are being hailed as a natural metabolic fix. The advice is bold and simple. Chew a few cloves a day to keep your glucose stable. It sounds almost too good to be true, which is exactly why I knew I had to test it with real data. For a while now, I've been focused on my own metabolic health, a journey I know many of you are on too. The more you pay attention, the more you notice how you feel after a meal, those afternoon energy crashes. You start hearing terms like glucose spikes and insulin resistance and begin to wonder where you stand. When the clove hack kept popping up on my feed, the analyst in me got curious. Personal stories are one thing, but hard data tells the truth. To get that data, I used a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM. If you're not familiar, a CGM is a small device that tracks your glucose levels 24/7, giving you a live graph of how your body is responding to food, exercise, and even stress. It's a direct window into your metabolism. My experiment was straightforward. For 1 week, I would chew 2 to 3 whole cloves after my biggest meal of the day. The goal was to see if they could flatten that post-meal glucose spike, a key indicator of metabolic health. I kept my diet, exercise, and sleep as consistent as possible to make sure the cloves were the only thing changing. I needed to answer one question. Is this trend a real health strategy or just another myth? It was time to let the numbers talk. The daily log, a week of clove consumption day. One baseline measurement. The experiment began. After wearing the CGM for a few days to get a solid baseline, I started the day with a fasting glucose of 88 milligrams per deciliter. My data showed a typical meal for me spikes my glucose to around 130 to 140 milligrams per deciliter. Today's meal was my control, a large salad with grilled chicken and an olive oil vinaigrette. About 15 minutes after eating, I chewed 2 cloves. The taste starts off aromatic, but quickly turns into a pungent, warming sensation that slightly numbs the mouth. This is from the active compound, eugenol. 2 hours later, the CGM revealed a post-meal peak of 135 milligrams per deciliter. This was perfectly in line with what I'd expect without the cloves. Day 1, and no noticeable effect. Day 2, the routine and the reality. My fasting glucose was 90 milligrams per deciliter. To maintain consistency, the day's routine and lunch were identical to day 1. After the meal, I repeated the clove ritual and watched my CGM graph. The curve was almost a carbon copy of yesterday, peaking at 138 milligrams per deciliter about 75 minutes after eating. Subjectively, I felt no different. This is a critical part of self-experimentation, separating what you want to happen from what is actually happening. So far, the data was telling me nothing had changed. Day 3. A minor deviation. Fasting glucose, 87 milligrams per deciliter. Today, I deliberately changed the meal by adding a small portion of quinoa to my salad. This is a meal that usually pushes my glucose toward the 145 to 150 milligrams per deciliter range. This was a targeted test. After chewing the 2 cloves, I watched the results. The glucose peak hit 142 milligrams per deciliter. This was interesting. While it was still a big spike, it was a few points lower than what I'd normally see with this meal. It was the first data point that suggested something might be happening. Day 4. Return to baseline. After yesterday's slight dip, today was a return to normal. Fasting glucose was 89 milligrams per deciliter. Lunch was back to the standard chicken salad, no quinoa. I chewed the cloves and waited for the data. The post-meal peak landed at 136 milligrams per deciliter, right back in the same range as day 1 and day 2. Yesterday's lower number was now looking more like natural biological noise. One side effect I did notice. The strong, lingering taste of cloves completely wiped out any desire for a post-meal snack, a confounding but very real-world variable. Day 5. The impact of external variables. Today was a powerful lesson in lifestyle. A stressful work deadline combined with a bad night's sleep had an immediate, visible impact. My fasting glucose, usually in the high 80s, was 98 milligrams per deciliter. This shows how much stress and sleep can throw off your blood sugar before you even take a bite of food. After my standard lunch and cloves, my glucose didn't just spike, it rocketed to 155 milligrams per deciliter and stayed high. This had nothing to do with my meal, and it was clear the cloves had no power against the physiological storm of cortisol and sleep deprivation. It was a humbling reminder. You can try all the hacks you want, but you can't cheat the fundamentals. Day 6. Back on track. After making sure I got a full night of sleep, I woke up feeling much better. My fasting glucose was back down to 89 milligrams per deciliter. I decided to repeat the test from day 3, adding quinoa back into the salad, to see if I could replicate that result. After the meal and the cloves, I watched the numbers. The peak came in at 144 milligrams per deciliter. This was consistent with day 3, again, just slightly lower than my usual response to this meal. A subtle pattern was emerging, not a miracle, but perhaps a gentle nudge on my peak glucose after a carb-heavier meal. Day 7. The final day. On the last day, my fasting glucose was a steady 88 milligrams per deciliter. I had the standard chicken salad for the last time, followed by the final 2 cloves. My post-meal glucose peaked at 134 milligrams per deciliter, another standard reading for this low-carb meal. Looking back, the week was a mixed bag. There were days with zero effect, one day where lifestyle factors completely took over, and 2 days with a higher carb load where a small, subtle effect seemed to appear. Now, it was time to put it all together. CTA, call to action. 1. If you're finding this deep dive into personal health data interesting and you're curious about other health topics like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more investigating to do together. Section 3. The Big Reveal, analysis of the 7-day data. So, after a full week of chewing cloves, did it actually make a difference for my blood sugar? First, let's look at the big picture. My overall glucose trends didn't magically improve. My average fasting glucose for the week was 91 milligrams per deciliter, which is right where it was before the experiment started. So no, there was no revolutionary drop in my baseline blood sugar. But the details are where it gets interesting. On the days I ate my standard low-carb salad, days 1, 2, 4, and 7, the cloves had virtually no effect. The post-meal peaks were 135, 138, 136, and 134 milligrams per deciliter. For that meal, these numbers are statistically identical to my baseline. When my carb intake was already low, adding cloves didn't move the needle. The story changes when we isolate the 2 days I added quinoa, which increased the carbohydrate load, day 3 and day 6. Before this experiment, that meal reliably spiked my glucose to the 148 to 150 milligrams per deciliter range. During the experiment, the peaks were 142 milligrams per deciliter and 144 milligrams per deciliter. This represents a small but consistent reduction of about 4 to 5%. It's not a miracle by any means, but for simply chewing 2 cloves, it's not nothing. It points to a very modest effect under specific conditions. But now, for the most significant finding of the entire experiment. The biggest glucose spike of the week, the 155 milligrams per deciliter on day 5, had nothing to do with food. It was driven entirely by high stress and poor sleep. The glucose dysregulation on that day was more severe than when I intentionally ate more carbs. This was the real shock. I started this experiment hunting for a benefit in a spice, but the data from my own body pointed somewhere else entirely. The biggest levers for my blood sugar control were stress management and sleep quality. The impact of one bad night was far more powerful than any effect from the cloves. So, the shocking result wasn't that cloves are a miracle cure, or that they're useless. The shock was the crystal clear data showing how profoundly the fundamentals of health govern our metabolic reality. Section 4. The science explained. Why did this happen? These results from my personal experiment led me to the scientific literature, and what I found helps explain my results perfectly. The potential of cloves to influence blood sugar comes from its bioactive compounds, particularly a polyphenol named eugenol. Research suggests these compounds may work in a few key ways. First, compounds in cloves can act as inhibitors for enzymes like alpha amylase and alpha-glucosidase. Think of these enzymes as what breaks down carbohydrates into sugar. By slowing them down, cloves can slow the release of sugar into your bloodstream. This perfectly matches the small blunting effect I saw on the days I ate more carbs. Second is the effect on the liver, which can create new glucose when needed. In states of insulin resistance, this process can go into overdrive. Studies have shown that clove extract may help suppress this excess glucose production. A third mechanism involves our muscles, which are major users of glucose. Lab studies on muscle cells have shown that clove extract can enhance glucose uptake, with one study noting an increase of up to 63% compared to untreated cells. Research has also identified a compound called nigresin, which is believed to help get sugar out of the blood and into the cells more efficiently. So, second is the effect on the liver, which can create new glucose when needed. In states of insulin resistance, this process can go into overdrive. Studies have shown that clove extract may help suppress this excess glucose production. A third mechanism involves our muscles, which are major users of glucose. Lab studies on muscle cells have shown that clove extract can enhance glucose uptake, with one study noting an increase of up to 63% compared to untreated cells. Research has also identified a compound called nigresin, which is believed to help get sugar out of the blood and into the cells more efficiently. So, with all this promising science, why weren't my results more dramatic? This is where you have to look closely at the studies. A frequently cited 2019 pilot study is a great example. In that study, 13 subjects took 250 milligrams of a potent, standardized clove extract every day for 30 days. The results showed a significant reduction in post-meal glucose, but this was in a group with prediabetes, and the effects weren't noted until at least day 12 of continuous use. That context is critical. My experiment was just 7 days long, and I was chewing 2 or 3 whole cloves, not taking a concentrated, standardized extract. The amount of active compounds I consumed was far lower and less consistent. My subtle 4 to 5% reduction on higher carb days suddenly makes perfect sense. It's a faint echo of the potential shown in formal research using a much higher concentrated dose over a longer period. CTA, call to action 2. And now I have to ask you, what has your experience been? Have you tried using cloves or another natural remedy for blood sugar? Let me know your story in the comments below. I truly do read every single one. The verdict on cloves. So, after a full week of tracking, research, and chewing, what's the final verdict? For me, the answer is not as simple as yes or no. The cloves themselves were not a magic bullet. They didn't erase the impact of my food choices. The data suggests they may have provided a very subtle flattening of my glucose spike when I ate more carbs, which lines up with the science. But on my low-carb days, the effect was undetectable. It was definitely not the game-changing hack it's made out to be online. However, the experiment itself was a huge success, just not for the reason I thought it would be. The most valuable takeaway wasn't about the spice, it was about the power of seeing my own data. That graph from day 5, where my glucose went haywire from stress and bad sleep, was the real lesson. It was a blunt reminder that no hack, supplement, or spice can make up for neglecting the fundamentals. Before we try to optimize with spices, we have to get the big things right: sleep, stress, nutrition, and movement. My final advice is this: cloves are a wonderful antioxidant-rich spice with promising research behind them, especially in concentrated extract form taken over longer periods. But do not expect them to be a shortcut that lets you ignore your lifestyle. The real hack is understanding your own body and getting back to basics. This journey started with a question about a spice, but ended with a much more important answer about the foundations of health. And a quick reminder, we are not doctors. This video is for informational purposes only. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed day, and as always, breathe easy, my friend.